Basilica by Dustin Gillham. He descends further into a realm where he will never be found. He seeks an awful truth others cannot fathom. The difference between who he thinks himself to be and who he really is. He already knows of the grand disparity between the man below and the man above. He marks his discoveries in a series of dog-eared journals. Everything before has led him here, either a conclusion or a new beginning. At dusk the insects are so heavy that they scratch about on the terrestrial floor like wildcats wandering aimlessly for prey. He searches the black night until nearly falling lifeless and dehydrated. In the torrid depths swirl colonies of insects and savage rats. Their glowing eyes and buzzing torments trace every move. The spiders of below are hairy or bald and naked. The clustered water pools harbor collections of amphibian puppets splashing about like reckless theater marionette dancers, the spiders silk torn in the midst of their rampant play. The search takes on an alien topography. Wretched bats dangle in bunches like clusters of furry black fruit. A tapping of unending water plays throughout the underworld like the temperamental oscillation of ringing church bells. He records all this in his journal. The flint of a rusty Zippo sparking and burning with dragonfruit orange circumventing an acetylene blue ridge. He stares until his eyes burn, while the crisp air works at the flame's subtle decay. On occasion, he presses a rubber-coated flashlight button, steadying the beam of light long enough to observe the unfamiliar surroundings. He stops to catch his breath, and then pushes the button again to illuminate a filthy basilica. Above him, muddy arches stretched like vampire bats loom. Vomit-colored sewage percolates through fault lines, and dark pipes stick out like rotting organs from the city's wretched underbelly. A grim slime slithers and oozes quietly in the dark. Dirty boots slosh through the swampy mouth of a hidden cave. He dives aimlessly deeper, through the surfaces where only creatures of the dark are familiar. On occasion, he passes a trace of abandoned utility work, where the terrain was unfit for men to brace the outlines of civilization. Split trees blacken with moss and rot. Shattered fragments of asphalt and brick spread like shrapnel. He finds a cracked bucket surrounded by bones. He does not know to what or whom the chastened fragments may have once belonged. Their origin contaminated and lost by the chittering teeth of voracious creatures having gnawed and dropped the pieces once they were absent of flesh. In a skull wriggles a slick centipede. Brown fibrous hairs flail and tether to the cranium with lengthy brown tentacles. It slithers in and out in crisscross stitching through cracked orbital eye sockets. His shaky hands drop the skull, and it clatters on a jagged rock, smashing the centipede's body like a broken train. He steadies his staccato breathing and uses his flashlight to expend a conical wormhole of light in order to brush the squirming centipede from the skull. He shakes the relic in a puddle to cleanse it, and cuts the light to feel the skull in both palms, careful not to crush the moist find. He cautiously tucks it away in his satchel. He finds an archaic church pew bench and sits so he can rest his weary legs and observe the discovery in great depth. He pulls the skull back from the satchel and resumes writing. He jots about something ancient found in the hidden place. He compares the grooves and ridges of the round orb to bones diagrammed in pages of old. Neither bird nor cat, he concludes. Something more familiar. Perhaps, he considers, someone. He explores further and notices the corridor of the cave draws to a stony impasse in which the walls seem to deteriorate all at once. The air suddenly becomes so cold it cuts through his lungs, and he pulls his flashlight to study the dark arches of oblivion. He looks at the wet ceiling. He carefully records every detail on a page containing a previous blueprint of similar design. As the flashlight hovers across scribbles on a mangy page, his eye is caught by breathtaking beauty. Before him lies the most potent and terrible place he has ever laid eyes on. The places before held failed hopes and an inevitable sense of defeat. Here and now, he realizes the potential of actually discovering the truth. His senses are mysteriously heightened. The flashlight bulb feels like a scorching fire. The faint breeze becomes a brazen gust. Drip drops from a distant void resurrect a cacophony of thuds drumming through his brain and synchronized with his beating heart. Something inhuman pushes his trembling body forward. The flashlight fails and his trembling hand drops it to the ground, where it falls with an audible crash. His journeys further into the darkness, unaware of where he goes. He ignores the pain of a sharp rock that nearly forces him to fall. He clings to his satchel with its precious contents of the sacred artifact. A baptismal lake lies a few strides beyond, clear and pure, void of muck and filth. He flicks his lighter and the dancing flame makes it glimmer like a desert oasis. A force beyond his observation robs him of his free will, and his mind observes his body being piloted. His rigged limbs stiffen and flex as he's pulled nearly chest-deep in the ice-cold waters. As the satchel is immersed and the skull slips from the ragged folds, it begins to mysteriously dissolve, and the water suddenly illuminates with a bright pearl opalescence. He tries to reach for the decaying skull, but the aqueous solution slips through his fingers like grainy ooze. He's able to recover the journal floating by his side, but as he holds it, the pages begin to burn. He feels no sensation of heat as it sits in the bonfire of his hand, until finally falling between his knuckles like snowy ash. Looking at the waters with as much horror as amazement, he sees his own reflection, and he begins to moan in horror. His face begins to sag and loosen. His skin wrinkles and folds over itself, and he is held in a merciless trance. His eyes scale and begin to flake, and he no longer sees. The last thing he hears before the world goes black is his own screaming.